I just sat here, everybody pointed.
Good morning, everybody. I'll reset a little bit just because in between sessions we'll get some new people into the room for the first time. My name is Sean Johnson. I'm the Legislative Director with the Maryland State Education Association, and we're so pleased that you're able to be a part of our second annual Policy Forum. A couple of things, housekeeping notes. When you came in, you have a folder. There's some index cards in your folder. That is your way of engaging with the panelists through the moderator. Any questions that you have that you would like asked for any session, please write them down on the index cards. Hold them up so either Amy Maloney or Randy Mickens, who will kind of be posted on either side of the room here on the walls, can grab them and bring them up to our moderator. Also, if to help us keep this conversation going, I also need to amend myself in case you listened to me at the start of the last session and not your program, because I had our hashtag wrong. To keep the conversation going on Twitter is hashtag MSEA Forum 15. Hashtag MSEA Forum 15. We encourage you to post and communicate there. And if you're trying to access the Wi-Fi here in Calvert House, the username and passcode is DRUM, lowercase D-R-U-M. Finally, housekeeping note, each of our panels will be posted later this afternoon on MSEA's website, marylandeducators.org. So if you're not able to stay for the entirety of the day, please check those out there. Next, given the work that I do, I'm particularly interested in our next panel, which is a look ahead to the 2016 General Assembly session and some of the issues that legislators will be facing as it relates to education policy. This year, we reached out to party leaders in both the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle to put together this panel. I'm very pleased to have a terrific group of legislators with us today, and it's my job to introduce the moderator. Lynn Lazarick is the editor and publisher of MarylandReporter.com. He was formerly the State House Bureau Chief of the Daily Baltimore Examiner from its start in April of 2006 until its demise in February of 2009. In the 1980s, Lynn was State House Chief and political editor of Patuxent Publishing, then a chain of 13 weekly papers. From 1988 to 1996, he was managing editor of Patuxent Publishing's 9 Baltimore County papers, where he headed a staff of 30 editors, reporters, and editorial assistants. He knows his way around Annapolis. Please join me in welcoming Lynn Lazarick.
Good morning, and for those of you in the back of the room, the lights are directly in our eyes, so if you're waving and jumping up and down or anything like that, we can't see you. So we have a good panel. You have their bios in the program here, so I'm just going to give their current titles. To my left, but not really to my left, is Senate Minority Leader J.B. Jennings. Actually, to my left is, and certainly to J.B. Jennings' left, is Delegate Ann Kaiser, who is the House Majority Leader and has retained her subcommittee chairmanship on House Ways and Means on education policy. And to her left is Senator Nancy King from Montgomery County. They're both from Montgomery County Democrats. And Senator King is a former member of the Montgomery County School Board, the largest school system in the state, and at one point is in the top 20 in terms of numbers of students in the country, correct? So, well, that's partly because, unlike a lot of other states, Maryland structures its public schools by county. So all our school systems are generally much larger than what you find in most places in the country except for the large urban districts. So we're going to start out just, I would just like to know, so the format is I'm going to ask the panel to discuss what they see coming up in the session. I have a few topics that I'm going to raise, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. And I guess Sean explained it. We're going to, if you have a question, write it on a card, and depending on the number, I will ask the question based on what you put on the card. So, JB, what do you see coming up in this session?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and having me here. When I got the initial invitation from Sean, I was a little nervous, but I said, what the heck, we'll go in the Lions' Den. But, Republicans are good people. We believe in education just as much as everybody else and what it does for our children. And I'll tell you personally, from a personal note, I'm a parent for the first time. 2 years ago, I have a 2-year-old, and then a month ago, I had a baby. My wife had a little baby girl. And our son is in preschool. And, I had the honor of serving in both the House Ways and Means Committee dealing with education with these two fine members to my left for 2 years, and then in the Senate, I served on Education and Health Environment for 4 years. So I've seen the education issues from both chambers, and as a student of public schools, K through 12, and higher education myself, I was a student. I went to school. I knew what it was like. Then when I was in committee, I listened to the issues, but now as a parent, I see it firsthand, and it's really starting to hit home for me, especially with watching my child, my son, the way he's changed going through pre-K at 2 years old. I mean, he already knows his colors. It's amazing. So I want to kind of get that out there and let you know that, it's this bad connotation that Republicans are bad people. We're really good people. So anyway, what do I see this session? First of all, the big issue right now in education is the GCEI funding. That issue, next session is done. It's over with the passage of Senate Bill 183. It's made it mandated, which Senator King was responsible for. So that issue isn't going to take time next session. I think the big issue you're going to see that, I put a bill in last year and I still hear it, is the amount of testing that these students have to go through, and I hear it from the teachers. So there's still going to be some funding issues coming up. I think you're going to see a lot on, especially the capital side, with improvements to these schools. And I represent both Baltimore and Harford County and Baltimore County. It's a huge fight for air conditioning. In fact, we had the comptroller invited the county executive, myself, and some others to a school on American Education Week. We thought it was going to be this great, hey, let's talk about education, and right into the air conditioning issue, and a little uncomfortable, I'll be honest. But it's a hot issue in my district, in my county. Well,
Yeah.
but it's an issue we're going to deal with. And I know is going to be coming forward. I'm trying to think a couple others. The other thing I can tell you that I hear, and I just repeated it, and now I'm talking in circles, so I'm going to stop, was the amount of testing that these students have to go through, the letters that come to me from the parents, the teachers themselves, the fact that they teach to the test and nothing else is wrong. So it's, as I say, give the teachers the power back to them to teach the students as they feel is right, is what we need to do, and periodically test. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. It's very good to be here this morning. It's good to see so many friends, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel and to talk with my colleagues, both of whom before they went to the Senate served with me on the House Ways and Means Committee, so we all got to know each other very well and work really well together. Want to echo the sentiments. Republicans aren't bad people, so you were correct. But I just want to talk about some of the issues that are coming up this legislative session. First and foremost is always the budget, and that's always the key issue, no matter what we're working on, no matter what the social issues are in a given year, no matter what the workforce development issues are in a given year, because the budget is a statement of our priorities. And I would say in this past year that there were cuts to education, part of a conversation we'll be having further this morning, where I think that doesn't represent the values of so many of the people in our state, and that we know that our kids should come first, and of course treating our teachers like the professionals they are. In terms of See, I should be like you and stop right at the applause line, but I won't go much further to say, on the GCI, I also, of course, have to give a shout out, not simply to a House member, but my district mate, Eric Lutke, who introduced the GCI bill on the House side, who worked closely with Senator King. We certainly will be looking at the testing issue this next session, as we did this past year. I know that Delegate Ebersol is here and that he and Senator Pinsky, through their bill, did a lot to raise the profile of this issue in terms of what we need to be doing and having this commission and getting this data and knowing that the test should be about helping the teacher, the parent, and the student identify the strengths and weaknesses and then being able to address those weaknesses and better educate the kids. And that's what it should be about. And lastly, on the point of school construction, we know how old our schools are across the state. We know that our students need 21st century schools. So I hope that we use some of that budget surplus to improve some of our schools, rebuild some of our schools across the state. Everyone needs it. So delighted to be here this morning. Really looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning, and I'm so impressed to even see some of my PTA people from Montgomery County here. So if you're from the PTA, raise your hand. All right. Pretty good. And there are also quite a few legislators. If you're a legislator, raise your hand. Okay, let's see. Let me just start out by saying quickly, we started out the session last year with a lot of new members, and it was probably the best legislative session that I've had since I came here, and I'm just starting my 14th year. It was the most bipartisan, friendly session that we've had. We worked together, got some really good people in the Senate. I think they did in the House also. And then it, of course, blew up the last 5 days of session and got to be quite partisan. Let me just say that I'm really hoping we start over again this year and lose some of the partisanship and just get to work on the issues that need to be covered, because we've got some very serious issues, and playing party politics just does not have a place in all that. So I'm hoping that we can move past that and get some things done this year. A couple different priorities that I have, of course, being on the Budget Committee, I'm always looking at money. School funding, school construction funding, for one, is a big deal in my county. I think it's a big deal all across the state. But there's been a lot of conversation about how big schools should be, and Montgomery County, my county, is really in a position where we can't limit how big a school is, because we have so darn many kids that we can't limit it because we don't have enough space. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about. The education funding, of course, happy about the GCEI, and just hope that all of the funding levels will be up to where they need to be because of the needs that we have. And I'm also looking at, I've been talking to the the community about college and career ready, that there is some tweaking that may need to be done there with some of our minority students. So that's one of the issues that I'll be working with MSEA and the community on for this year.
Okay, one of the funding is really an important issue. I wondered, are any of you following the what's been called the Thornton II Commission, the adequacy of funding? It's not going to be. It's not going to be an issue I will ask you whether there's anything coming out of there that will be an issue in the upcoming session. I would think that the 2017 session, the report of the Adequacy and Funding of Education Commission is not due until the fall of next year. And that's probably the place. They're looking at things like mandating class sizes, so that, telling basically school systems that you could only have a certain maximum for class sizes, which then trickles down to all kinds of funding issues. But do you see any elements of that sneaking into this session as kind of foreshadowing? I would think would be significant debates when they actually come out with their report.
I think just to start the answer in terms of the adequacy study, already getting a briefing from some of our great staff that we have here today, but just knowing that some of the reports and some of the draft reports have already shown up, there's pieces to the study, but I'm still not sure that that necessarily indicates that there will be legislation this year addressing some of that. Certainly we have a lot of more information to receive in terms of those funding issues and all the pieces that we should be including. To answer your class size question, I mean, when the research shows that class size matters, we obviously know it's a resource issue, but it may be the case of maybe it's just reading classes, maybe it's just K through 2, maybe it's just kids who are having challenges, and then we will have to prioritize. But I do think that the research has shown that too large is not good for our students or our teachers.
Nancy, have you been following at all what they've been doing, or are you just
I've been
waiting?
following, but I'm kind of waiting to see what the result is that comes out of it.
Something that's actually more current, if you've watched or attended the Board of Public Works meeting, which, by the way, are both live streamed and archived, so you can see the comptroller and the governor ranting and raving about about school construction, and they're looking for ways to build more schools with the same amount of money. Do you think that that's a real possibility, Senator King?
We've talked a lot about that in my county because we've built some really beautiful, great schools. And I talked to the construction people, and they're telling me that they're building schools that are going to last a lot longer than the schools that they built 10 or 15 years ago even. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, I'd rather spend a little bit more money and build a good school that is going to last for a long time than have to be coming back in such a short amount of years and wanting to build another one.
Mm-hmm. Senator Jennings?
It's an issue that we've heard about in Baltimore County, as I have gone back to before. Do you build these enormous, beautiful structures? Do you go with something that's going to be more modern, using a what they call, I guess, general steel building type of structure that's quick, get it up and get the students in there and start educating them? I went to school at Carroll Manor Elementary School in Baltimore County, and there's, I think, six elementary schools in Baltimore County that have the same exact footprint and building design that was built back in, I think it was the 30s or 40s, that, the school did it. They didn't invest a lot in engineering other than one design, one plan, and they were able to replicate that around the county. I think there's things like that we can look at. Does every school have to be unique? I understand the topography of the land and the geography where they're going, they may have to make some changes, but there are some things I think we can look at for lowering the cost, again, repeating the same design on other buildings. And one issue that I've heard that keeps coming up is updating our HVAC systems in these schools. In Baltimore County, it's the air conditioning, but it's also the heating systems. They've got boilers that are 50, 60 years old. And, I looked at a statistic once of what it costs to heat these schools with these old type boilers versus the newer ones. There's things like that they can start to upgrade and modernize the old buildings that we've got. And then can we go in and refurbish them instead of rebuild them? But what's interesting is you'll see McDonald's or Burger King, instead of rehabbing McDonald's will tear it down and they'll rebuild a new one because they say it's cheaper to do it that way. Well, is that what has to happen in schools? They've done it. Bel Air High School was torn down completely and then rebuilt. I'm not a construction manager. I don't understand, or I know construction, but I don't know the ins and outs of it like these people do. That they're paid a lot of money to look at what's best for these schools. I just know that in my district, they go at schools that are leaking roofs, windows that are broken. It's something that needs to be addressed all over the state. We did it 2-3 years ago with Baltimore City. We put together a plan to help them, but there's other counties that have problems that are trying to upgrade. So,
and
Can I add as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
The requests coming in from across the state are about $600 million for school construction. So we have these needs across the state, and at this point, the governor is talking about $250 million, which is where we were last year, which is really barely just treading water Our schools, there's no accommodation for inflation of costs, and I certainly agree with the senator that there are opportunities for cost savings. But our aging schools are only getting older, and so those costs are only getting higher, and the impact on our students who aren't in modern buildings. And then I think on the flip side, outside of the educational side of things, that school construction dollars are an immediate and direct impact on jobs in this state. So I think it's good on a lot of levels that we invest more in school construction.
Senator King?
I live in a neighborhood full of teachers who I hear from quite frequently, about every day. And the thing that makes me sad this year is that I have talked to so many teachers who are saying this is the worst year I have ever had teaching because their schools are so overcrowded and there just isn't room to spread out and do what they need to do. And I mean, I've talked to teachers that have been there for 25, 30 years who are absolutely miserable because we're so crowded. And we have so many schools, our communities are built out so that the only way to go is up in adding seats for kids. And most of those schools, the old schools, aren't built for adding floors to the top. So that's one of the big issues that we're dealing with is just where do we put all these kids? We're growing between 2,500 and 2,800 kids a year. We have for the last 5 or 6 years. And so it's very hard to build those seats and try to keep within some kind of a price range for the state.
And one of the issues that has come up, the Capital Debt Affordability Committee on September 30th, a meeting that no reporters attended. I don't know exactly why no reporters attended. I can't even remember why I didn't attend. In any case, the Hogan administration, through Secretary Brinkley, came forward with a proposal to cap debt at $995 million for the next 5 years, which there had been an inflation factor built into that. Treasurer Nancy Kopp opposed that, but she lost in the 4-1 vote. So it looks like there are continuing needs. It looks like the money is going to be capped. Do you see the General Assembly? I believe the General Assembly has authority to increase the general obligation bonds, does it not? Right.
Yes, we do. And I'm guessing that will be a major discussion that we have this year, but we've not really gotten into it yet.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that I would add, and there's been a discussion of that there's a $521 million surplus now, and certainly we don't want to invest in something that may have ongoing expenses, but certainly we have an opportunity here with this debt limit to use some of that surplus for one-time costs like school construction. So I think we have a real opportunity to try something different and not even bond in some cases and increase our investments.
One of the things that Governor Hogan has been handicapped with is the bonding that was done in the previous administration. You know, he's paying a lot of interest on those, which is really starting to eat up a lot of the money the state does have that could go to other programs. So we have to make sure we balance that we do as many pay-go projects as we can. You know, if we're going to use bonding, let's make sure that we can afford it. It's a concern that the governor has, and you know, I know that last year in the Senate we had discussions about it. You know, education is extremely important, as we know, but the governor has to look at the entire state as a whole. You know, we have roads that are crumbling, we have bridges that are falling down. There's one I know in my district that had to be shut down and be rebuilt because it was unpassable. So he's trying to deal with everything he can across the state, and he has a limited amount of money. He's given as much as he can right now to education. He's going to give more. He's working on it. So it's the one thing I want to say is let's look at the bigger picture in the state and make sure that we know that, hey, we've got other issues we have to address too, just as important as education.
And one of the issues about this, a proposal that comes forward every year, it has to do with the prevailing wage. If that were eliminated, the Carroll County school system, for instance, has said that they could build schools for a third less, but those proposals to eliminate the prevailing wage, essentially paying having union level wages on all school construction projects and all state contracts of a certain size. Do you see any possibility of that changing? Those things have never come out of committee.
My quick response on
Repealing it, yeah.
my quick response on all of that is that I don't think public dollars should be invested in projects that leave workers not having a livable wage. I don't understand that.
Want to remind the audience that if you have questions, put them on an index card. I have some of my own questions, but this relates to school construction now, and I'm actually a little puzzled because I don't understand. I thought we were moving ahead here in Baltimore City. It says no 21st century schools have broken ground in Baltimore City. Is there anything the state can do to move the process forward? I thought a couple of years ago we passed $1 billion in funding. What's the deal? I see the panel here nodding their heads.
A bill was passed, which gave roughly $1 billion to Baltimore City to both upgrade and build new schools. It gave the money to the city, but however, it gave the Maryland Stadium Authority, I guess you would say, control of the money in the projects. I don't know why it hasn't moved forward. I've heard stuff was in the pipeline, but I do know that we did pass a bill, and on the legislature side, we did do our part to help Baltimore City.
It's something that we created that with our Budget and Tax Committee a couple years ago, and it's something that we will be anxiously awaiting an update from Baltimore City on to see where they are. We haven't had any briefings on that yet this summer, so it will be something that we'll be talking to them about and see how they are moving forward.
And in fact, 2 sites are going to be breaking ground this January, and the Stadium Authority is going forward on bonds on that. So while it took a little while, the work the legislature did a few years ago is bearing fruit in Baltimore City.
Okay, all right. The Congress just passed and the President has signed an Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It among other things, essentially eliminates a lot of the requirements of No Child Left Behind, or as the NEA president said, no child left untested. Do you see any action that the legislature is going to have to take to respond to the changes in the federal law that came out of that?
Well, I know last year, for instance, I put a bill in that dealt with, I think it was kindergarten placement testing and other types of testing. There were numerous bills put in dealing with it, and the feedback we got during committee hearings was, if we don't do this testing, then we're going to get penalized by the feds for not doing the testing. Therefore, we can't pass the bill because we won't get the money we need. What I think this does is it now takes that argument out of the equation, so then we can come back with some of these bills and look at them and say, okay, what can we do? You know, what's best for the student? Let's be honest. It's not about, you know, the teachers. You know, it's what's best for these students and getting them the education that they need. And let's move forward. And, you know, should we be testing at such a young age? Should we have so many tests? Should there be so much concentration on it? So that's where I think we are now, is that it has taken the argument that we kept getting in EHE committee last year when I presented my bill. The argument's gone, I think.
I think it's going to take a little bit of time for all of it to shake down to the state and local levels to see what we're going to do with this. But it sounds a lot to me like it's kind of been dumped in the local school board's lap as to how to proceed from here. And with this testing commission meeting and coming up with some solutions, I'm sure we'll be hearing from our very shy teachers in MSEA with some ideas this year for legislation.
The one thing I would add on No Child Left Behind, I feel like it did one good thing. It forced us to look at the data in ways that we weren't always looking, and realizing the racial achievement gap and the class achievement gap throughout the country. And so, if nothing else, it forced us to look at data in ways we weren't doing beforehand. I certainly hope that the new authorization in changing how we do testing and also in putting some flexibility back in the states where it should be. So I agree with Senator King that we certainly a wait-and-see approach. And since you mentioned our Commission on Testing, I know that our chair of the Testing Commission is here, and he's a principal from a high school in my district, so it's good to see Chris Berry here. Thank you.
And for the audience online and maybe out here, there is a testing commission that was passed this session. It took nearly 6 months for it to get off the ground. I'm not sure exactly what the complication was. I think some of the complication was that it was 19 members, and there were a number of different categories that the governor's office had to appoint. The presiding officers appointed pretty quickly, basically appointing the sponsors of the bill, so that was pretty easy. But the testing commission is not due back in till next year. Not sure which of these questions to deal with first. We got one with like six, 7 different parts. It looks like an outline for a class here. In any case, do we have a teacher shortage? It simply lists issues impacting education, teacher shortage. Do we have a teacher shortage, or do we have a problem with the teachers that come into the system? We're still a net, I believe we're still a net importer of teachers into Maryland, are we not? Is there anything that we have, that the legislature needs to do about a teacher shortage, and is there a teacher shortage?
I don't believe there's a teacher shortage. I think that there were an awful lot of teachers that got moved around or lost their jobs this year when we didn't get the full GCEI funding in the spring. My county alone had cut $18 million worth of teachers, and that obviously makes tighter class sizes. So hopefully that will get ironed out this year, and we won't have that as much of that problem for next year.
I think in terms of a shortage, certainly not an overall shortage, but often a challenge in sometimes our rural areas, sometimes in foreign languages, sometimes math and science, sometimes poorer communities. So there are ways that the legislature can address that, certainly sometimes through certain type of payment, some type of arrangement there. I would say in the related issue, sometimes the issue is the teacher training. So I don't question the teachers. I sometimes question the schools of higher education and ensuring that conversation is happening with our K through 12 systems to say, what is it that we should be doing better in training the teachers to come to you? And I think that too is a role the legislature can play in ensuring that our higher education programs are providing all the right classes for our teachers. Thank you.
The one thing I love about the marketing of politics is whenever there's a budget shortfall, it's always we're going to have to close fire stations, lay off police officers, or lay off teachers. It was never saying, well, let's look at some of the administrators. Are we heavy on the top side? It's always they're going to go after the teachers. The other thing is that I've noticed is 2 years ago, gasoline and petroleum products cost $4 a gallon. This morning on my way down the road, I stopped at Wawa, I got a coffee, and paid $1.95. So these schools have seen some savings in the energy side of it, both fueling the buses and the heating oil. But when it comes to teachers in school, making teachers want to come here when kids in high school, when they decide where they're going to go to college, what they want to do for a living, they want a job where they're respected and they know that they can go home every night knowing that they've done something good. And that's what that's what they need to have, that feeling of being a teacher. They need to be appreciated in the classroom, instead of little Johnny getting in trouble and calling the parents in and the teacher telling them that Johnny did something wrong. And then, when I grew up, my parents would look at me and say, what did you do? Why did you do that? Nowadays, the parents look at the teacher and say, it wasn't him, it was somebody else. It's these helicopter parents. I put a lot of this issue when it comes to teaching on the parents themselves. And I'm now a teacher, a parent, and I see it. And teachers only have a child for what, 6 hours a day, if that. They can only train them so much or teach them so much. They have to go home after school. They have to learn. They have to do their homework. And, you only have the tools that you have for that many hours to teach that child. And you want to know when you're done at the end of the day, that when you graduate that kid at the end of this class, or in June when they leave you to go to the next grade, they've gotten everything they needed. They've learned everything they needed to know, and they've improved. They need to be appreciated, and that's what we as a state need to do. We need to make sure we take care of them with their pension. That was an issue years ago, but unfortunately it's an issue we have to deal statewide, is that they know that they have a good pension. They're going to have a good salary that pays them a decent salary. They have good living. It's things like that we have to look at. We have to look at what do we do in the legislature? What can we do? What can we take off of them that makes their lives harder in the classroom? One of them, I believe, is testing that we should look at. What can we give them to incentivize them to want to teach? The one thing I always get complaints from is, the one thing many of us as legislators always deal with is parents that have a kid in another school that shouldn't be there. They get caught, and they're trying to keep the child in that school system. And they come to us because the schools have said, nope, they got to go. They have to go where they should be going, where they live. And they want us to intervene. And, my philosophy is, look, you live in that house, you pick that address, that's where you have to live. So it's issues like that I see that makes teachers' jobs harder. And, I respect the job that each and every one of you do. But it is tough in this state with look where we are financially, dealing with everything on a state's plate, making sure that we have it all. But the thing is, let me know what you see. What issues in the classroom can we help with? I have one school where I think they're a Title I, where they have everything they can get. They have a room full of these pyrethrum boards that they can't use in every classroom, but they can't transfer them to another school because that's not a Title I school, and it can't go there. So it's issues like that we need to find out about, where we can say, hey, you know what, if we have excess of something here, let's transfer it to another school. If there's a law, let us know, let us change it. So, kind of rambling, but I'll be honest, I'm nervous. Here I am in the lion's den. I'm making sure that, I tell you what, so.
And it should be noted on the GCI, the governor let the bill go into effect without a signature because he didn't want to have a veto fight about it. Here's something, and I'm going to throw in a comment. It asks about would panelists support a millionaire's tax devoted to education? It mentions the highest number of millionaires. The state has the highest number of millionaires. The problem with the use of this figure is the millionaire's tax refers to people with $1 million in income. The people who, and it's actually a marketing company in New York that assesses the number of millionaires in the states, that is assets. And a lot of those people are actually long-term federal employees who have very large thrift spending accounts, 401ks. So it's a difference between income and wealth. But we did have a millionaire tax. We have maybe 100,000. Do you see any prospect for any kind of tax increase? And let's start with the member of the Budget and Taxation Committee at the far left.
I don't see any chance for any tax increase this year at all. I sure don't see it on the Budget and Tax Committee. We've been around the bend with the millionaire's tax, and everybody's got an opinion on it, but I look at my own county, and while the jobless rate has gone down, the income rate has also gone down. We have lost a great number of our high-wage income people, and it has really affected our county budget. So how we know, there are a lot of people working, but they're not bringing in these millionaire salaries that we used to have. The millionaires moved out of state to protect their assets. So that's just the millionaire's tax, but I don't see any taxes passing through our committee this year at all.
I would agree with Senator King's sentiment. Certainly serving on the Ways and Means Committee, I don't expect to see those tax increases either. But the other half of that question in terms of if there were some tax to dedicate that extra funding to education, I think that's a dangerous path to go down with dedicated funding. I think we should look at our entire general fund and just know that education should be one of our top priorities.
I agree. I don't see any tax proposals on the table that would pass, nor do I see the governor signing them. But if I remember correctly, back in 2007 when we passed the slots bill, a lot of that money was dedicated to education. But the thing is, when you dedicate funds, as Delegate Kaiser said, you guarantee the funds here. Well, it's a shell game. That means we could take money out of the backside and move it somewhere else. So it's not an increase in funding when you dedicate a fund. All you're doing is just mandating it to go here, but then it lets them take it out the backside, move it somewhere else. So that's the issue we have when you deal with this dedication of funds.
And a couple of people raised the issue of increasing poverty, which is, I think, partly a result of the recession, and it's an issue that Senator King brought up in the sense that there's been a reduction in overall salary. People have not been getting the kind of raises, and other people have slipped below. And as we know, this is directly related to achievement. So a couple of people in the audience raised the issue, is there anything that the state can do related to poverty and its impact on achievement in the schools?
Well, I think there's a lot that we already do and already try to do, and you've already brought up the adequacy study, and potentially there could be a commission this next year, and we won't see those results until the end of 2016. But part of what that's looking at is what does it cost to adequately educate a child, and we know that children in poverty bring more challenges to the classroom and therefore need more resources. So I do think this question might be better for next year at this time to figure out what that could be based on what the study comes out with, and then what the commission will be looking at. But we definitely need to do a lot more for those students.
One of the things that I think we need to really look at and find a way to help the problem is with our minority students. I was at the minority legislative breakfast the other morning, and one of their priorities for this year was the number of students who turn 21 and still are not able to graduate from high school, and the services for them after that. We have so many students coming in, and it's not just Montgomery County, it's across the state, I think, coming into our school system at maybe the age of 13 or 14, and they can't catch up. They're maybe not even well educated in their own language, let alone in the American language. And I had one minority parent say to me the other day, what good is it to put my son in a classroom and have him reading Macbeth when he can't even read English? It doesn't make sense. So I think it's something that we really need to take a look at. As far as our schools go, we've got to do some kind of individual education for these students so that they can succeed also. And we have a huge number of students like that.
Are there, did you want to say something?
But 3 or 4 weeks ago, Harford County had its legislative day with the different county agencies that came in. I was there along with my colleagues here, Delegate McComas, Delegate Riley were there. And Harford County Public Schools came in. The one thing that caught my attention was the fact they said the number of farm meals has increased, the free and reduced meals. And really? And it's showing that, yes, there is starting to be a poverty issue where, with the cost of living is starting to increase, and the kids are the ones that are feeling this. And, making sure that a kid doesn't sit in classroom hungry is a big issue. Make sure they have the supplies they need to be able to do it, to do their class. But also, it's, again, I go back to the home, making sure that they have a home environment that is inviting to them to go home and study and read and continue their education outside the school. So it's things like that we need to look at. And again, I keep going back to the teachers, giving them tools to communicate with us, saying, hey, here's our problems. Here's the issues we have. And I think one of it is we need to open up the dialogue more. Let us know, we're always up in the 30,000-foot level on these issues. Let's go down to an individual side. Let us know. You got 188 legislators here in Annapolis that each of them are concerned about their district. The teachers need to communicate with them. The PTAs need to communicate with them. I saw something on Facebook that, you look at the parking lot of Ravens Stadium and it's full on Sunday, but you look at the parking lot of a school on PTA night and there's 3 cars. That's what's wrong. That's what needs to stop. We need to get the parents back in the classroom, back involved. So,
Are there any issues not related to funding that you see coming back up this session, or new issues that we've never talked about? It seems like on education there aren't any new issues, but issues that keep coming back. For instance, charter schools. In the audience, we have the governor, one of the governor's advisors, Kiefer Mitchell, and I asked him just about an hour ago, is the governor going to come back with the governor proposed major changes in the charter school law, which got totally rewritten by the General Assembly, and Kiefer said, well, we're looking at things. It's under advisement. Yeah, right. Do you see anything on those kind of non-funding issues?
The only thing that I would like to see a change with as far as charter schools go, I'm not against charter schools, but since my days being on the Montgomery County School Board, I've always had the feeling that if a group could come with something that is totally different than what is already being taught in the public schools, a different way to educate our kids, I could support something like that. But to just take those same dollars and teach the same way and the same things that are being taught in a charter school, to me just doesn't make any sense. But I've talked to educators, for all the students that can't just sit in a classroom and learn, be talked to all day or something like that. I think there's just such a huge movement to change how we teach in a classroom. I went to 3 different conferences this summer, and everybody's talking about it across the country, really, as far as, are the days over where we just stand in front of a classroom and talk to kids for 2 hours at a time? Or do we get them into hands-on things and team things and various different ways to learn that is more exciting than having somebody talk to them for 2 hours or whatever? So I think there's just a huge movement across the country on that. I think we as a state and local government or local school systems really need to be looking at this. What they're telling me is that in 10 years, this is what I learned this summer, in 10 years, our classrooms, especially in the high school, will look so totally different from what they do today. And I think that's exciting. And as far as then for charter schools, if somebody comes up with a great idea for educating kids that isn't the same old of what we're doing now, I say go for it. But to just take dollars out of the regular public school system to put into a charter school, then I'm not so much. Thank you.
I would echo Senator King's statements. I would say that what we did this past year was that we fixed a 12-year-old law, and we rewarded the good actors, and we provided more flexibility with the charter schools. But if similar legislation were to come back, we rejected 3 main components of that legislation, and I just want to talk on the one piece of it, the uncertified teachers in the classroom. I think back to my days at Rockville High School. My Algebra 2 trigonometry teacher, he was so smart. Mr. Bell, he was like the smartest guy ever. But you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have said his name. He was not a good teacher. He was not able to convey that knowledge. So to suggest that the charter school legislation about putting uncertified teachers in the classroom, let's stop devaluing teachers and think that anyone can magically teach without the training.
You want to say anything?
Well, this session, outside of the budget issues, I do think that the big issue is going to be the testing in the classroom. I figure you'll probably have some legislators that'll introduce GCEI, or I'm sorry, Common Core legislation to get rid of it. 45% of the legislators in Annapolis right now were freshmen as of last session. The House had an incredible amount as well as the Senate. So last session, for many of these freshmen, it was about understanding the process, what a first reader was, what a second reader is. Now they've had one session, they've gotten their sea legs under them, they're ready to roll. So I think you're going to start seeing people putting in a lot of bills. I know that Legislative Services is pretty inundated with bills right now from a lot of freshmen, and I think you're going to have some that they ran on issues, whether it's Republican, Democrat, whatever, and they're going to put those in. So I do think you're going to see something about repeal of Common Core. You're going to see issues about testing, the amount of testing in the classroom. So those are going to be out there without a doubt.
Can I just say that I got an LR number? That's the number of the bill that Legislative Services, they take them by number. And I got an LR number of 1420 last week. In all the years I've been here, I don't think we ever have more than 100 bills in the first day of session. And Mike Miller is always yelling at us to get our bills in so we can start our hearings. Of course, these haven't all been entered yet, but these are all bills that have been
You
drawn
got a
up.
draft number
So
1420?
yes. So
Okay.
so say goodbye to JB because his committee probably has the longest hours in the Senate of hearings. So he will be locked in hearings for the next.
I guess I better
3 months.
staff up for the first day. Typically, especially last year, the first month, the General Assembly didn't do much of anything. They were just figuring out, and as Senator Jennings has said. But here's something directly, a little love note for Senator Jennings here, has acknowledged repeatedly that there are unmet needs in transportation and education. How can Governor Hogan pass a tax cut if we have so many unmet spending needs? Of course, he hasn't. He's
He's
promised
not-
to try to cut taxes. But
He has.
You answer the question. I'm not
Look.
going to answer the question for him.
Voters last year spoke, I think. A lot of Maryland citizens were tired of the increased taxes they were paying, whether it be the tolls, the sales tax that we now have, the increase from 5 to 6. It is a balance that he has to meet or make for this state, for every citizen, and provide adequately for everybody. Just as we sit here today talking about education being important. I had a meeting about 2 months ago with Secretary of Human Resources about issues that agencies facing with, the critically disabled children and adults in our state and the help that they need that they're not getting. He's talked about tax increases, but he can't do anything like that without the legislature's approval. He's got a couple things he can do through executive order. I think he's done those. But moving forward, it's a matter of making sure that we're allocating and spending the money properly. Last year he went to each of his agencies and asked them for a reduction in spending. What can we cut? Where can we, sharpen our knives, our pencils when it comes to the budget in each of these agencies? And they're looking at it. There's some departments where they had vacancies that, maybe we don't have to fill that one, but there's others that do need it. And the one thing you always hear is, let's do a cross-the-line cut for every agency. I think that's wrong because you have some agencies that have seen major increases over the years that, hey, they're doing all right now, but there's some that have not. It's not fair to them to cut those agencies. It is the job of being the governor. Last year I was elected as minority leader, and I got to kind of go to some of these backroom or these meetings that we had as Delegate Kaiser, not backroom, but there were budget meetings talking about the process, and you start to realize and see how immense this state is. $40 billion in expenses. Where do we have to put all this money? So, he's talked about it, but in real, I think there are some areas where we can make some cuts, but it's.
Len, I'd like to just add one sentence to this. While there is no doubt that this governor campaigned on cutting taxes throughout the state, and that resonated, I don't believe once did he campaign on cutting education.
Got a question here about the the declining enrollment in some of the school districts, the governor offered, in terms of next year's budget, money to Carroll County to prevent them from closing schools, but the school board went ahead and did it. Do you see any effort to somehow hold these systems harmless? We know it's Carroll, Allegheny, and Garrett. I think Kent County is also experiencing that. Do you see any effort on the legislature to help them out?
Yeah, one of the hardest parts, and I've talked to some educators from Carroll County who are kind of frustrated over the issue there. These educators here know in order to really have a full program in a high school, you've got to have a certain amount of students to be there, and nobody wants to close a school, but there have to be enough kids at a school to offer them the full program that they need. That's why the consolidation has been necessary, just to be able to offer the program for those students.
As Len had mentioned, Garrett, Allegheny, Carroll, and Kent are the 4 counties, I think, that have seen a reduction in schools in the way that the funding mechanism works. Because they've seen a reduction, their funding goes down. Every other county has received money, increase in money. Those 4 have gone down. The legislature recognized that several years ago and actually put some money into trying to deal with this issue for these rural counties, but the administration at the time refused to fund it. It's an issue that's going to pop up this session without a doubt on trying to deal with those 4. You saw what's happening in Carroll. It's been a fight. So it's going to be front and center this session, no doubt. Something Kiefer's going to have to deal with.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
It's something that we talk about on budget and tax all the time, and we have George Edwards from Garrett County, who we love dearly, and he is always there as a champion for his county to make sure that there is enough funding for them, and we do take a look at those counties quite closely to see how much more funding we can possibly do for them.
I put two questions here, and we have about 7 minutes left now at this point. We're closing up at 11:30. And that's about the safety of schools. Today, one mentions today's the 3rd anniversary of the Sandy Hook tragedy. Do we have safety in schools? And what about the earlier panel talked about trauma-informed education. Are there any legislative efforts to fund or mandate school-based mental health services or other school safety initiatives? You know anything about that?
I have not heard of any so far this year, but out of those 1,420 so far, I bet there is something. The whole thing about school security is just such an issue for parents and teachers and administrators. And the sad part is that you can't guarantee that something isn't going to happen. I don't care how much security you have. And I think we do, across the state, have very good security in our schools. It's been a priority. There's still no guarantee that something isn't going to happen in a school, because you just can't see into the future and see what somebody might come out and do. So, but I think that we're out front anyway on it.
Unfortunately, we live in a different world nowadays where we have to worry about stuff like this. I remember my parents when they were kids, they had to worry about, I think they did nuclear bomb drills where they would go down into the basement. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that. Well, who knows with North Korea, but
well, we
don't teach that right now.
Worrying about it. That's all.
But now we have to worry about these horrible incidences that take place, and I think school boards and the administrations need to look at each school and triage them to make sure that they're able to protect those students. Are all the doors locked? People just can't open the door and walk in. Is there a vestibule where they have to stand in between before they get buzzed in? And I know some schools, in my district, I guess the new construction idea was you put the office at the front door, so that's where you come in. I have other schools where the office is farther down the hallway, and they're having to use video cameras. And some of the stuff, I think, as we look at some of these schools as they go into refurbishment, hey, let's move the office. Let's move it down here so that they can actually get eyes on outside the window and see who's coming up to the door. They can see them. Is there a way to keep people from penetrating the second door? They have to be buzzed through the first one, and then they have to be buzzed through the second one. Things like that, I think we need to make sure we take care of.
I would agree with both Senator King and Senator Jennings on what they've said at the schools. I think back to the part of your question in terms of mental health services, I do think we need more of those in the schools. And I do know at least one colleague is putting in legislation about community-based schools that would bring in more of those after-school services, mental health resources, and so many other things. And I think that's something we really have to look at.
1 minute apiece as we're wrapping up. Is there anything that you think is important related to education that will come up this session that we haven't talked about? Next. Okay. I didn't want to end on this down note, but because I did. No, is one of the earlier questions, but please comment on the effectiveness of the recently appointed P20 Council. I would have difficulty explaining to you what the P20 Council does, but somebody on this panel might know. I know it's related to education and workforce, right? No? Yes?
I was on the former P20 Council. I have not heard anything about the new P20 Council, so I really can't comment on
Okay.
the whole thing.
I think somebody out there knows a lot more about the P20 Council than we do up here. Huh? Yeah. You want to say anything closing? I
Let me
thought
say
that's
in
what I
closing.
did with my last question.
Well, we didn't want to leave end on a downtrodden issue. Let's talk about the great things in this state. Maryland, we do a lot of things incredibly well. We have one of the greatest emergency medical systems in the world. Between the EMS and shock trauma. When it comes to our education, we have some of the greatest classrooms and teachers in this world, without a doubt. I'm a product of public school education, K through 12, and again, as a community college, University of Baltimore. So I've been publicly educated my entire life. It is, as I said earlier, we need to make sure that the teachers have the tools they need to be able to teach properly in the school, and that they have a job that they love and respect, where they know that they're respected by everybody that they encounter, whether it be the students or the parents. They need to make sure that they're safe in the classroom, that they're not getting beat up by their students and having issues in the classroom. So it's things like that we need to make sure that we as legislators address. As I said, you have 188 of us down here. Each of us has a concentration somewhere else, where they're an expert, a subject matter expert. Me, it's farming, it's military issues. That's what I've done my life. That's what I do. Those are the issues I fight for and work hard for, as well as making sure that we have incredible education system in this state. You need to make sure, whether it's you sitting here or out there on the internet, that next session, pay attention to the bills coming up. Communicate with your legislators. Talk to them. If they're not willing to talk to you, they don't deserve your vote. That's what we're here for, is your voice when it comes to this session, whether it be the budget or the issues. Sometimes we're going to agree, sometimes we're going to disagree. But in the end, we all have the same goal of making sure that this is the greatest state in the world, where people love to work, love to live, and they want to stay here. When they retire, we don't want them to go into Florida or Delaware or somewhere else. We want them to stay here and stay with their families and continue, prospering in this state. So I'm honored to be here. I tend to speak from the heart. I tell you what I see, and sometimes things slip out that I might regret, but that's the way I talk. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to dance around it. I'm going to tell you how I see it. Next session is going to be tough. There's going to be fights, no doubt. But do realize that all of us have the same goal of making this a better state. We have different ideas of how to get there. But I can't stress enough, communicate with us. Even if you don't like me, and if you're in my district, I will talk to anybody.
Likable.
Well, no, but some people, they get mad at you on an issue. But still communicate with me. Be honest and be cordial with me. I'll be the same with you and get your point. Like I said, when I first started speaking this morning, my views have changed as a parent. I've seen it now with a child. Before, it was hard to get it through this thick head because I wasn't a parent. Now I am, and I see it. So there's things that you're going to be able to tell me and teach me and educate me with that will change my opinion. So with that, I thank you for the time and look forward to working with you next session.
I want to also thank you for inviting all of us to speak this morning and give us an opportunity to talk about the issues, and quickly wrapping up in terms of my focus in terms of chairing the education subcommittee and what I'm looking at when the issues are brought forward to us, that we're obviously looking for things to be student-centered. That should be the basis of the decision. When it comes to teachers, it's how are we treating teachers as professionals? And then when I think of the funding dollars, for me, the important thing is that public dollars should be supporting public schools. So I just want to wrap up by saying that my door is always open, my office is always open, the subcommittee is quite very open, but we really look for everyone's input throughout the process, because together I think we can solve a lot of issues. So again, I thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, and I do think we've had a good discussion here today, and kind of picking up on what JB said. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter that lives with me, and early childhood education when my kids were little was important, but nothing like it is today. And to me, just watching her and watching what she does in preschool and seeing how important preschool is, and just the pre-K education is critical for kids, and getting that to the most kids that we possibly can, I think, just can only help them. So that's one of my big priorities. I did just want to say we've had a little bit of a teaser from the Augustine Commission that has been looking at taxes, and what they're saying is that Maryland is not a bad place to live. That we are pretty much in the middle of the ballpark as far as taxes go, and people are really generally happy here. We're waiting for the report to come out to see the whole thing of what they say, but that's the little teaser that has come out of the committee, and I think it bodes well for the state of Maryland. So we've got lots of work to do. We look forward to hearing from all of you. Don't ever hesitate to call us, because that's what we do, whether we're in session or out of session. So I look forward to continuing to work with you. So thank you so much.
So a round of applause for the panel.
Thank you, Senator King, Delegate Kaiser, Senator Jennings, Mr. Lazarick. One more round of applause.